Hi, I'm Julia. Welcome, or maybe more importantly, welcome back to my YouTube channel, NB Library. I've been on hiatus for a long time, and now I'm back because I want to be. So I'm just excited to be filming videos. I've been watching a lot of Booktube lately. I've been reading a ton in the last 12 months or so. And I wanted to catch you up on the books that I've read and enjoyed in quarter 3 of the year. So that is July, August, and September. I'm not going to go back through and go over all the books that I read and enjoyed this year. I have already been talking about them to myself. I've been recording a voice audio every month with a sort of monthly reading wrap up, but that's just for me. But now I want to be making videos again for you, for my friends and the subscribers that I somehow still have. And then I'll of course do, if I'm still making videos by the end of the year, an end of the year wrap up, and so you'll be able to hear more about the favorite books that I read earlier than July. Got my laptop here. First of all, I'm going to do some of my stats for quarter 3. I read 57 books in total in the last 3 months. I know, it's a lot, I told you. So that's 28 in July, 18 in August, and 11 in September. Not as many as I wanted for September, but in my defense, I was in Italy for 2 weeks and I didn't really want to read that much. My average rating for July was 3.56. My average rating for the whole year has been hovering around there. For August, it was 3.42, and for September, actually, it bumped up to 3.77. I've only had about 8 5-star reads this month. I give out 5 stars very, very sparingly. Like, I've rated lots of things 4.5 and 4.75, but a 5-star is not just a favorite of the year, but a new favorite of all time to me. So that's why I'm so sparing with it, I think. But there is at least one 5-star on this list. Of all the books that I read in the last 3 months, I purchased 40% of the books that I read, and 36% of the books I listened to on audio. 32% of the books that I read were by white authors, 30% were by black authors, and 37% were by Indigenous and other peoples of color. Now I want to talk about what my favorite books were that I've read in the last 3 months. These are in not chronological order, but a rough order of like most favorite to least most favorite. First was my favorite book of the year, knocking The Maid and the Crocodile by Jordan Fueco off its top spot that it had had since like the first week of January. This had so many elements that were catnip to my brain, and that was Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson, and I gave it 5 stars. Vespertine is so influenced by Sabriel by Garth Nix, one of my favorite books of all time. The premise is sort of, what if Sabriel was in a sort of possession, Penric and Desdemona situation with just a really sarcastic undead, like Mogget, the cat from Sabriel, or as some people have memorably said, what if Sabriel was being possessed by Murderbot? So if that combination of words sounds as good to you as it did to me, you should definitely read Vespertine. It's also been described as like Joan of Arc meets Venom, but essentially there is this nun. I think she's meant to be autistic or some other neurodivergent coded, but because of tragic things in her past, she is not very good at talking to people or really knowing what to do in social situations. She has lived in this nunnery cloister for most of her teenage life and is looking forward to staying there and becoming a nun and just living a quiet life. But unfortunately, fate has other plans for her when she has to take up the spirit of a revenant in order to defend her convent, and then the plot goes from there. I love the trope of a like friendly possession. We've been seeing it a lot in the past few years. My favorite example is Penric and Desdemona, but it also happens in Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon Ha Lee and the Tixkalon books by Arkady Martine, as well as a few others. I just love it so much, like a body sharing. Leia Rose, aka Himalaya on the Storygraph, calls it a guy in your head. So yeah, that's one of my favorite tropes. The main character is like stated by the author to be aromantic and asexual, and so many good things I want to talk about. She is so ready to do what needs to be done. She is, I think, a little bit hesitant, but like never refuses the call and is so useful and important to the plot and has so much bearing on the plot. At the same time, she has like a not like other girls thing that she needs to work through, where there's this girl from her convent who was her roommate who she thought was really scared of her and is like girly and likes dresses, and then when she sees that girl out in the world and isn't living in the convent anymore, she loves talking to people, she loves fashion and society, and Artemisia, the main character, realizes, oh yeah, she was wasted at the convent. That was not the right place for her, and kind of, well, I don't want to spoil, but kind of gets over her not like other girls little bit of a complex that she has going on. But besides the guy in your head, the climax of this book, without spoiling anything, has my favorite trope, which is the desperate march to the end, I like to call it, where it's Sam carrying Frodo up Mount Doom, it's Pastor Oates carrying Nanny Ogg in Carpe Jugulum, it's one character like supporting another, both literally and metaphorically, through like what they think might be the end of their life. And there's a part I'm gonna cry just talking about it, but I was listening to this audiobook while I was driving and I almost had to pull over because I was sobbing. Like, I could barely see. That's how hard I was crying. Artemisia can barely walk or do anything at this point in the story, and she's like on the verge of passing out basically, and the Revenant is sort of like keeping her conscious and keeping her going, and she says it felt good to be supported by a friend, whereas the Revenant had up to that point been so sarcastic, and we get to see those little moments of the Revenant's like love for her showing through. I knew partway through this book that it was really going to be something special for me, but that ending really sealed it. So yeah, my favorite book of the year. I always do this where like I'm talking about my favorite books of the year, and so I'm talking about something I'm really passionate about and books that made me really like emotional, and so then I get emotional while I'm talking about them. Hopefully we're putting the emotions to bed now and I can talk through them a little bit better. The next book is Mr. Collins in Love by Lee Welch. Okay, hear me out. I haven't read Pride and Prejudice, but this book is a gay historical romance, and it's like, what if Mr. Collins, all of his explanations are he's just really, really autistic, and so he doesn't know how to socially interact with people, but he's really trying his best. Like, he's actually trying really, really hard to be like a good man and a good person. And then a man he knew when they were both young comes back into his life and ends up becoming his gardener, and the two of them kind of rekindle a relationship that they had when they were young. I have a confession to make. I was just picturing Sam and Frodo in this book the entire time, and that's partly why I liked it so much. It's, you know, like a country squire and his gardener. Need I say more? It's a really good ship. There were moments in this book that were so sweet. I had to do that thing where like I put my e-reader down and go, oh my god, that's so adorable. Like the giggling, the kicking the feet, the just, oh my god, like I went all gooey for this book as my favorite romance of the year, and I rated it 4.75 stars. Next, another book that might make me cry was Homie by Danez Smith. That's not actually the name of this collection, but I'll put up on the screen why I'm not saying the name of the collection. This is a book of poetry by Danez Smith, who's a Black non-binary poet, and this is like one of the best poetry collections I've ever read. It is about friendship. Like, the poems are about love for your friends, and I value my friends in my life so, so much. I get so emotional about them. I love being around them, spending time with them, hosting them, just any opportunity I can to be around my friends. And I have friends that are so close to me and so important to me, and so this book really resonated. Like, there's a poem at the end that is partly poetry by Denez Smith and then partly a compilation of things that people submitted to them talking about their friends, and so it's just a poem of like dozens of different people talking about how much they love their friends. Oh man, it's incredible. I highly recommend it, and I gave it 5 stars. Next is Radiance by Catherine M. Valente. I am going to talk a little bit later in another video that I'm working on about another book by Catherine Valente and some books by her that I've tried reading that didn't work for me, but this book absolutely hit. I've owned this since maybe 2019, maybe earlier, and was really intrigued by the premise but had just never gotten around to it. And then I was completing a book challenge and it came up for some reason, I don't remember why, but I cannot believe that I left it this long to read this book. So this is a sort of mixed media, like epistolary novel about an alternate universe where space travel was invented in the 1850s, and not only that, but the solar system in this universe is the same as ours, but it's more a solar system that early sci-fi writers imagine, like H.G. Wells or Georges Méliès or Jules Verne, where the planets are still far away, but they're close enough to get to within a few months, and they're all inhabitable, and they all kind of have their own shtick, where like there's oceans on Venus and you can live on Pluto, and it's such a glittering, sparkling jewel of a novel with just gorgeous prose and incredible whimsical world building and details. I mean, there are transcripts of ads and radio shows in here. There are scripts from movies. It is all about movie making, and in particular, the life and disappearance of a famous young director who is herself the daughter of a famous director, Percival Unk. And Severin Unk, we sort of swirl around the details of her disappearance, where at near the beginning we know that she's disappeared, but it's not until like the middle to end of the book that we know what happened, and even until the very end there is still a mystery of how she disappeared, what happened to her. But so many other aspects of her life and life in the solar system along the way. I'm quite obsessed with this book. I think about it all the time. It's deco punk, as in art deco punk. It's a subset of diesel punk. It's, you know, a 1920s kind of aesthetic and technology. I'm constantly on the lookout for other deco punk books or books that remind me of this, but I don't think I will ever be able to find a book that is quite like this one, and I rated it 4.5 stars. Next was a book that I read in one sitting on the plane to Italy. It was A King's Trust by Essie McPherson. This is a self-published fantasy novel. It is the author's debut novel, and it's the first in a trilogy that I'm so excited to see where it goes and read the rest of. I love a political fantasy. I mean, I don't love so much reading about kings and princes and royalty. I'm much more interested in, you know, how we dismantle those systems, but every now and then I just want to read a political fantasy, and this had been really highly rated by Sia at Every Book a Doorway. I get a lot of book recommendations from her. This was so enjoyable and had moments where I dragged my hands down my face going like, ah, on the plane. So the gist is that the main character, Beau, he's the POV character, he's the heir and prince of this kingdom, and his older brother, the Golden Boy, just died under mysterious circumstances, and he has been living on an island, like, as just a guy for the last 8-10 years or so, and loves it there, thinks of it as home still. Like, he's like, I miss home, I'm homesick, I hate it here, and is trying to navigate this den of vipers of the royal court, and his parents, who are clearly wishing that he had died instead of his older brother. He has a bodyguard named Elias, who is very close to him, as well as his brother's fiance, the Duchess Penamore, who loathes him, but at the same time he loves being around her and talking to her. And this does turn into a polyamorous romance. I'm really excited to see where the rest of the series goes, where Penamore and Elias are both Beau's love interests. And I really can't tell you more because there are so many things to spoil, but this book had romance, treachery, secrets, suspense, awesome world building that is definitely got to get expanded more in the second book. I mean, fights, revenge, torture, true love, all of that. It was so much fun, a great accompaniment to a plane ride that felt like it would never end, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Next was a book by a favorite new author of mine. I've read 2 of his books this year that I really, really loved, and this one just came out a few months ago. It is The Dark Maestro by Brandon Slocum. This is about a boy, Clarence, who is a cello-playing prodigy. Really, all he wants to do in life is play the cello. He is so dedicated to it, and it is told from the perspective of Curtis, not Clarence, his dad and his dad's girlfriend, who's my favorite character in the book. She's incredible. She's the best lady, hands down. And over the course of the novel, we see the family from when Curtis is very young and is first learning about and how to play the cello up until he's a young adult, when something that his dad was involved in goes wrong and he and his entire family have to go into witness protection program, where he's a famous cello player and now cannot appear anywhere playing the cello. The familial relationships in this book and the forgiveness that all of them show each other over the course of the book were incredible and absolutely my favorite part. This book gets a little bit long in the middle, where you just kind of want it to get to the next part and the next act, and so I think that kind of brings down my rating for this book. It felt like it was kind of going on longer than it needed to, but I was so amazed listening to this. I just wanted to listen about this family forever. I fell in love with them so much, and I really just wanted to listen to all of the music referenced, and I won't spoil why, but there end up being some kind of original compositions, and I want to hear those so bad. I know they don't exist, but I really wish that they did so I could hear them because they're described so beautifully. So I rated that 4.25 stars. Next was Sister Outsider, a book of essays by Audre Lorde. I was trying to read this for Sapphic September and it just didn't work out. I wasn't able to complete that challenge, but I had this on my TBR for a while and I bought a copy of it last year, and I'm glad I did because I ended up underlining a lot of this book, where I don't usually annotate books, even books that I own, but it really felt like being back in college in a good way, where I did get assigned some really incredible books in college and ones that made me think so much as this book made me think, and really felt like a call to action for activism and having a place in the queer community and the feminist community. So while I really, really enjoyed this and got a lot out of it, and I rated it 4.75 stars, I wouldn't necessarily consider this one of my favorite books of the year, just because I am rating it that because I think it's very, very well written, but it's not necessarily a book that I'm obsessed with, although I do think that everyone should read it. Next was The Bright Sword by Liv Grossman. It's so long. My favorite podcast right now is Not Another D&D podcast. Earlier this year, they were running a campaign where they were all knights, and they had all talked about reading this book and how much of an inspiration that was for them, so that's when it came on my radar. I haven't read the Magician's trilogy, and so I hadn't really known to look out for this book. And then while we were in Italy, I kept looking in bookstores and they kept having very few books written in English, but in one of them I picked up this book and read the first few chapters, and I didn't buy it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, and so every bookstore we went into from then on, I kept looking for it, and I finally found it and just was kind of reading it non-stop over the next few days. this is a Arthurian novel about what happens after Arthur died and all of the people left in the wake of that, and the very few knights and people in his life that are still left alive. The main character is kind of an outsider. His name is Colum. He's a young 17-year-old knight from northern Scotland, like very, very far away from Camelot, but he wants nothing more in life than to be a knight of the Round Table, and so he travels all the way to Camelot, and Arthur died 2 weeks ago. But he is kind of swept along in this absurd quest and trying to answer this question of who's the heir after Arthur, because they don't really have one, and all of the squabbles and conflicts as they try to figure that out. Although Colum is the main character, every major character in this book gets a chapter where it like goes back and goes over their life and why they're here and what happened. And the character writing in this book was so strong that after every single chapter explaining a character, I was like, I just want to read about this character from now on. I want them to be the main character. And then that happened like 5 times. At first I was like, why is Colum here? And then he got more personality and we learned more of his backstory, which is very tragic, and it made more sense. I still kind of would have liked more of the other characters' POVs in here. And a thing about this novel that I think is not very strong is something that is so Arthurian, where the Arthurian legends don't follow a conventional plot structure. It's just sort of like, and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened, it was crazy. And so that's kind of what happens in this book, where I think it could have safely been 50 to 100 pages shorter. So that's why I only rated it 4.25 stars. There were some points in this book where I thought this could be a 5-star book, but I think by the end it just gets a little bit too out of control. But I do want to read a passage from Sir Dinadan, who you find out in this book is a trans man. He's a trans knight. And there was this line from when he's young and sort of has this trans awakening that I can't stop thinking about. She didn't laugh at what she saw in the shivering water. She recognized that translucent apparition. The identification was immediate and electric. She'd never seen him before, but she realized she'd been looking for him for years. Look at that boy, she thought. Just look at him. I'd know him anywhere. That line has been playing on repeat in my head. It's like one of the best trans realization moments that I've ever read. It's so beautiful. So if you like high fantasy, Arthuriana, knights, and just kind of absurd quests, I highly recommend The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. Next was a nonfiction book, Becoming Earth by Ferris Jaber. I have been more into nature writing this year. I kind of have been ever since reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer back in, I think, like 2020. And I've been chasing the high of Braiding Sweetgrass for a long time. I have really been enjoying Robert McFarlane's work this year, and I got to see him give a talk at a local bookstore and got him to sign a few of my books, which was very, very lucky. And during that talk, he mentioned this book by Ferris Jaber and said that it was one of a bunch of great nature books being written and published right now, and so I had to check it out. This book is arguing that Earth is alive, and it kind of talks about this thing called the Gaia hypothesis, which was in the 70s about how, like, in kind of a woo-woo way, where, like, the Earth is one big organism, but then Jaber goes into the scientific backing of that, saying, well, there's all these microorganisms, and all of these systems that are interconnected, so yeah, you can argue that the Earth is alive. And as someone who enjoys nature writing but is not a scientist, I was very persuaded by his argument, in so much as that we are all systems made of microorganisms and smaller systems, and so is the Earth in a way. And so this book is broken into parts of earth, water, and air, I believe. Now, one thing about this book, although I rated it 4.5 stars and I really enjoyed it, this was in a period, probably in July, when I read 28 books, where I was reading things a little bit too fast, and I was chasing that high of completing books and marking them as done. I wouldn't say that I skimmed anything, but I did listen to this on 2 times speed, and I didn't retain as much of it as I wanted to, but I knew that I really liked it, so I bought a copy on my e-reader, and I do want to reread it, and I think that I'll get more out of it. And coming down to the last 2 books, the first of which is The Fire This Time by Jesmyn Ward, which I rated 4.75 stars. This book is a response to James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. Its subtitle is A New Generation Speaks About Race, and it's a response to protests and the Black Lives Matter movement. I've been wanting to read it for a very long time, and this year I've read 400 Souls and the 1619 Project, and of all of those collections, I think that this one was, if not the strongest, definitely my favorite, where 400 Souls and 1619 Project are very intellectual, and this book really resonated with me because, one, I felt like it was easier to read and understand. I mean, I enjoy reading those history and almost theoretical books like the 1619 Project, but this one I felt like, oh, I have a much firmer grasp on like what people are saying here, and I felt a stronger emotional connection to this essay collection. It's split into 3 parts that deal with history, the present, and the future, which I think was a very strong way of dividing them up, and it allowed the authors to have a lot of breadth in the subject matter, but all tying back to the prompt of a new generation speaking about race, or speaking about and with the themes of James Baldwin. And I was so impressed by this, and it's another book that I really think everyone should read. And last but not least is The Witch Rose by Kate Elliott. This is a high fantasy novel. It's the first in a duology. The next book comes out in November, so I'm very excited, and I'm kind of glad that I waited to read it until we're so close to the next book, because it's hard to wait and figure out what's going to happen next. So we follow our main character, Ellen. She has a nephew who's a very important character who doesn't get POV, but he is trans. His name is Kay, and they live in a small town up in the mountains. They're very far away from the capital and far away from court politics, but they both become embroiled in court politics when one of the princes of the empire shows up in their town and needs to be escorted through the mountains. And there's no one better to escort him than Ellen, who is a courier who routinely walks through the area that he needs to get through. I loved Ellen as a character. She is so sunny, but also practical and competent. And she repeatedly says, like, I'm good with people, but I don't know court politics very well. I don't know, your history, what's going on, how to address anyone. I am just a courier from the middle of nowhere. She definitely has her own secrets that she's hiding and is not entirely telling the truth about where she's from, which leads to some interesting developments. But another interesting development, which is a bit of a spoiler, but it does happen early on in the book, is that, as this is another possession trope, but the prince does not listen to some warnings and is basically possessed by a spirit that is so much nicer than him because he's a huge asshole. But this spirit possessing his body, he and Ellen start to have a little bit of a connection, and he keeps wanting her to come along with them on this journey. This book, as a fantasy novel, is, I think, so mature and self-assured in its world building, where there are no big info dumps. We just sort of learn things along with the characters, and it's clearly a very complex and well thought out world, but we learn that over the course of the entire novel. And there are some really cool things about this world that lead to some complications, but that we also learn more about the mechanics of. So there's this thing called the Pall, which has beset this empire, and there's a lot of talk over the course of the book about what is the Pall, why is it here, when did it show up? But it is sort of the spores of this fungus, and so part of Ellen's job is to find when the pall is starting and root it out before it can even grow into something bigger. But part of the land is just surrounded by this sea of pall, and it gets into some fungal horror, or what's the word for that? Like sporer, maybe? I think it's sporer, where if you get touched by the pall, it does really fucked up things to your body, and it's just basically a death sentence. And so everyone has a big vested interest in not getting touched by the pall and also preventing the pall from spreading. This is one of those books where I was listening to it on audio, and I just kept coming up with reasons to be listening to an audiobook, and so I would be like, it's kind of dirty in here, I think I need to clean the entire apartment just so I could listen to the audio. And although it was long, I felt like it used its length well, and definitely left a lot open for the sequel, which, as I said, I'm very excited to listen to. So those are my stats and favorite books that I read in the last 3 months. I'm really happy to be back. I've already got some other videos in the works here, so you'll be seeing more from me very, very soon.